Hi, I'm Carolia from the Yoga Lunchbox, and I am interviewing today Tiffany Cruikshank, who is another of the amazing yoga teachers coming to Wanderlust in both New Zealand and Australia. Now, most of you have probably heard of Tiffany. She's an LA-based yoga teacher, author, and health and wellness expert, and she's probably, for her age, one of the most highly educated yoga teachers in both Eastern and Western medicine. That includes a master's degree in acupuncture and Chinese medicine. So she's dedicated her life to the twin disciplines of holistic healing and yoga for over 2 decades. Now, Tiffany is the founder of Yoga Medicine, which offers not just a 200 and 500-hour yoga teacher training, but also a 1,000-hour yoga teacher training. So welcome, Tiffany.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're stoked to have you coming down to New Zealand and Australia next year.
I know, I'm so excited. I haven't been to New Zealand yet, so
yeah, because you did Wanderlust in Australia last year, didn't you? Or it would have been this year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we missed out here in New Zealand.
I'm looking forward to having the full weekend next time. It'll be nice, so
yeah,
it's good.
A full 4 days. So I'm really curious about your background because you know your stuff inside out. Like, you got into yoga when you were 14 and holistic healing at 14, and it sounds like you were pretty serious about both right from the get-go. Why was that? Because not every teenage girl goes, wow, this is the thing, and I'm going to apprentice myself to a holistic healer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like anything in our lives. When you reach something, a challenging point in our lives, we look deeper. And for me, I was a troublemaker, and my parents sent me away on a wilderness program. And one of my guides was an herbalist, and he would take me out on plant walks. And I mean, for me, it was really all about, I was 14 years old and I was lost and I never really fit in. I was always kind of nerdy, but I liked fashion. I was always kind of like lost in between the crowds at school. And I was teased a lot as a kid. And it just really drew me to search for answers and look for things. And, when I went on the wilderness program, just learning how to survive was really empowering. But then learning how to heal and help people I was just really drawn to it. And so when I went back, I started apprenticing with another herbalist through my early teens, and then with an acupuncturist later on. And I mean, I knew right away that I wanted to go into some form of medicine. It was just kind of taking the rest of my teens to kind of figure out exactly what and how, and getting through all of the, high school, college, pre-med, all the prereqs.
Yeah, right.
And right after I got back from the wilderness program, I started yoga. And for me, they kind of both went together. It was kind of, as a teenager, just feeling comfortable in my skin for once. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I was really conscious of that, but it was, I had always been really athletic. So I found there really weren't classes or studios at all. And I just had seen this sign somewhere and remembered it. My mom would drive me and just fell in love with it. It was an Ashtanga class, and I just fell in love with the athleticism, but feeling that there was something deeper, that sense of like, I'm not really sure what this is, but there's something here that hooked me. So and then continue on.
When was the first moment when you realized, like, kind of figured out what was hooking you deeper? Like, obviously you're doing Ashtanga. It is, on the face of it, predominantly a physical practice, although far more. Can you remember when you started to really get that sense of what yoga was beyond the postures? Was there a particular moment, or was it just an accumulation?
I don't know that there was one moment. I think for me, it really evolved. I never really expected that this was something I would do as I'm doing now, but I knew that it was something I wasn't going to quit. I remember in acupuncture school, my mom would be like, I taught a ton of classes through Chinese medicine school, and, we took 13 classes a quarter. So on top of that, I taught 10 a week, and it was a lot. My mom said to me once, she's like, why don't you just quit teaching yoga? You're going to quit once you get a real job anyway. And I was like, they just don't get it. My parents are very conservative, and to them at the time, yoga was like a cult, and so they were always worried that, I was getting involved in something that might not be the right thing. And I just kind of like let it go. And, one day eventually they figured it out. But I don't know that there was one time. I actually ended up doing my teacher training when I was 16 with there were only really a couple at the time. This was before the internet. I remember getting like a pamphlet and had pamphlets to look at, and had summer break, and one of them worked, and it was an ashram in the mountains. And so it was actually very much focused on meditation and philosophy and more spiritual practice, which for me was like, whoa, I had no idea what I was showing up for. I was raised very Christian, but learning the deeper elements, I'm really grateful for having randomly found that one, because it gave me a lot of depth in the philosophy and the background of yoga, which most people aren't aware of my background in that sense, I guess.
Because that's quite a young age to be immersed in that worldview, and most people at 16 have no idea that there's other ways outside of their own culture of perceiving reality. So.
Yeah, and at the time there really wasn't. There wasn't much of it around, So it really wasn't thought of as like, whoa, this is a cult, and you're in some weird. I remember going and meditating and chanting and being. I was a hippie when I was a teenager, so I was open to it.
Yeah,
but I was, I grew up in that culture of, the cult fear mentality of just kind of like, I like this thing. I'm not sure what it is, but it definitely drew me deeper into that side of it. And so I really spent a lot of time more in the meditation and that side of it for a few years, and then eventually went back to Ashtanga and then back to Vinyasa.
Because you ended up doing all 4 primary series, like the 4 series in Ashtanga, didn't you, all the way through?
I did, yeah. It seems like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
Don't ask me to do it now.
So then, I guess looking at your history and where you've come from, so you obviously studied a lot, and you've got an enormous knowledge on that intellectual level, but also on the experiential level in the body, with having done all 4, levels there of Ashtanga. Where do you say, what have you found to be your edge? Like, what are the real blocks that you've come up on your yoga journey, things that you've hit up against? Because for some of us, it's the physical, right? We get into the fit and we can't get past a certain point, and that maybe tweaks things in the psyche, or, I think
for me, I've hit a lot of physical limitations. It might not look like it in pictures you see online, but back bends are a very hard part of it. I think for me, Ashtanga really intrigued me, and being someone who was athletic, it was really nice to be able to like accomplish and go through the series and have this set sequence. And but I think for me, it actually eventually became something that was really limiting for me. It kind of fed into my type A tendencies that were already plenty there, and I actually ended up hurting myself really badly, and that was why I quit. But it was a good learning point. I learned, it made me very strong. I'm very grateful. I have a lot of respect for the practice still. But I think having that a pretty major injury in my body, I think really taught me a lot about kind of the deeper layers of the practice, and then kind of moving it around and being able to take it, like what you were saying, is to have this. I had a lot of this really brainy experience of working with patients and all of my Chinese medicine, and then I had a specialty in sports medicine and working a lot with athletes. And for some reason, I was still teaching Ashtanga and Vinyasa and not really like pulling them together. So when I injured myself, it was like this big slap in the face of like, hello, Tiffany, why aren't you using what you know?
Yeah, right.
So it's a big turning point for me. And that was kind of, I think, the beginning of really turning more toward this yoga as medicine. I feel like now people have so much of that. It's like you either do Ashtanga or you do like yoga therapeutics, which is more restorative. And for me, yoga as medicine is like, no, you can really approach any of these practices, Ashtanga or restorative or all these different styles and levels, with this sense of awareness of the body and the anatomy and the physiology, and really make it therapeutic. For someone in their 20s, that's going to be very different than someone in their 70s. And so it's not like you have to stop doing Ashtanga, or you have to only do restorative or only meditate or only do this, but to be able to approach it in a way, I like to really teach my teachers how to see the body, train them to train their eye.
So let's talk about yoga medicine, because this seems like a sort of accumulation of your life's work in a way where, like you say, you're bringing together all of these different threads in a cohesive manner, and then you're teaching it to other teachers. When did this start? When did you found it? Is it fairly recent?
Officially, it just launched a few months ago.
That's what I thought.
It works for a few years. It's definitely been in the works of an official brand for a year or two, and I think the fusion of all of the different parts of it has been kind of coming together for I don't know, 5 years or 6 years. For me, it's really fulfilling. It's really makes sense. I never really your path kind of evolves over time, and you don't always know where you're going, but you trust that there's a purpose to what you're doing. And then one day, and this happens over and over in our lives, I'm sure, but one day you realize, oh, okay, this is this is what's happening. This is where I'm going. And yoga medicine was that for me. After a couple of decades of studying and a decade of seeing patients and working really hard at kind of trying to pull it together both from the experience and the brainy world, it just feels really meaningful to be able to train teachers to kind of think like I do and see the body. That's kind of the whole purpose for me in Chinese medicine, and in Western medicine, we go to school for we do thousands of hours.
Yeah.
And that's after pre-med and after, all of that, the prerequisites of college, 4 years of your undergrad and pre-med. And I really wanted to create something that was like that was like medical school for yoga teachers, that really trains people to see the body and to evaluate people. And to me, it was always the biggest limitation of all these styles of yoga, where that I love them all. Like I love Iyengar, I love Vinyasa, I love Ashtanga, I love all these different styles so much for me personally. But the one limiting factor that I think they all have is that they all have a kind of a one way of doing things. You do triangle pose, you do it this way. You do this pose, you do it this way. And in order to help your sleep, you do this. And in order to help your back, you do this. And as a medical provider, that's, to me, it felt so wrong. And I wanted to be able to train people to really understand how to apply that for the person. And so in order to do that, you really need 500 hours. Is like, I would graduate people at 500 hours and be like, oh, we still have so much work to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is how yoga was applied back in the day. If you look at what Krishnamacharya was doing, he was working with the people and what they particularly needed and giving them his yoga prescriptions, I guess, based on his body of knowledge.
And, it was funny, I was thinking about this the other day. I really do believe that if Krishnamacharya were around now, and, especially in an age where we have so much access to anatomy, I think there would definitely be a place for it. I mean, there's this whole other side of yoga that's really spiritual and about, becoming enlightened as well. But I think even understanding the anatomy it's a pathway, it's a gateway to that as well. For me, I love the anatomy, but there's always those moments where you're like, this is way beyond me. And there's so much more than the anatomy is just the tip of the iceberg to get us to kind of experience that gateway to what is deeper.
So let's talk a little bit about this, because I'm really curious.
I'm
really curious about that comparison between the yogic view and the Chinese medicine view. So Chinese medicine talks about Chi and how that moves around the body.
Sorry.
And of course yoga talks about prana and how that moves around the body and nadis. And so I wonder, because you've been immersed in yoga and you've been immersed in Chinese medicine, you've sort of seen both of those things. From your experience, do prana and chi map to each other, or are they two separate things? Or, do nadis and meridians map? It's something I've always wanted to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar. Prana and chi, the way I see it, are one and the same. They're just different ways of talking about energy in the body. One of the best definitions that I've heard is it's like energy on the verge of materializing. So it hasn't quite created movement or done something. It's kind of pulsing in our bodies, just waiting to create something. And we can't see it or touch it or palpate it, but it's, prana and chi to me are one and the same. And, the nadis and the meridians are just, I mean, from my knowledge and my awareness, and there's always different interpretations. But the meridians are just a little bit more better laid out, I guess, than the nadis. I mean, we have nadis all over the body, and the idea is that, we have meridians that are very more like precisely delineated in the body of where they are and where the points are. But I think the idea is still that there is a circulatory system of these energy pathways that go through every part of the body. Even there might not be a specific meridian or acupuncture point in that spot. There's no like dead zones in the body, in my opinion.
So when you're working with, say, a patient that comes in and you're giving them like a yoga prescription and you're looking at them, is what you're seeing both anatomical then and energetic? So you can see where there might be dead spots in their energy and where things aren't flowing?
Potentially. I think that's the intuitive part. That's harder to teach someone. But I think, when I'm working with someone, there is, some of the more intuitive, which we could call energetic or intuitive, and also the evaluation. Obviously I'm looking at, how their SI joints are moving and what their gait is like, or, come into different poses and the anatomy, but also, even things like their facial expression and checking in with them. And energetically, you can kind of see that as a yoga teacher. Once you've been teaching for a while, you can see energetic patterns. And I think it sounds like funny and mystical to talk about it in that way. To me, it's just very real. It's just what it is. It's nothing mystical that you or I or anyone else couldn't figure out once they've been doing it long enough. Once you see the body and you've watched it enough times, I don't think you need to be someone who, like, one of a million people who can, or the only people who can do it. There's this funniness of like, oh, you can see things.
It's like, well, so could you if you train yourself. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about some of the classes that you will be teaching at Wanderlust, both at Cockatoo Island in Sydney and in Great Lake Taupo down in New Zealand. One of them is, now I'm not sure what you meant by this, which is why I wanted to ask you. It's billed as Vinyasa RX, Heal Your Shoulders. What does the RX refer to?
So RX is a prescription. The pharmacy use the RX sign, and it really is just like a prescription for shoulders. So what we do is we look at the anatomy, common tendencies, break down a lot of it is looking at chaturanga. Chaturanga is such a big place where we can either hurt ourselves or make ourselves stronger, and with that refinement, there's a lot you can look at there, which can be helpful for pretty much all of the rest of poses. And I do tutorials on Yoga Glow. There's a lot of really simple things to look at, but it's nice to have a little bit more time to really look at the difference person to person. There's a lot of structural differences that change how we move, and the potential to be able to set up properly for these. A lot of times, one of the things I feel really strongly about, one of the things I love doing is breaking down misconceptions. Like a lot of times in yoga, we have this idea that you have to line up your shoulders and your elbows have to be 90 degrees and this has to be at this height, and everyone's going to fit into this straitjacket. And really kind of looking at how to set it up so that it can be something that's really individualized to fit many different shapes and structures, rather than fitting everyone to this rigid form and it working for some and not for others. So we will look at the shoulders and kind of like how to approach it that way.
So that's more of it's a workshop with...
Yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of demonstration and stuff, but it's not a flow class. It'll be more lecture and looking and examining.
But that ability as a teacher to teach in such a way that you're not cueing off sort of what I call maybe hard cues, that's what really takes your teaching to that next level, isn't it? So that you're allowing for people's variations of bodies while instructing them in a safe way into a posture. Is that what, I guess that's what you're teaching in your 500 hour and your 1,000 hour, and hopefully even your 200 hours, right?
It's a little bit harder that way, but I think it's more valuable. It's nice to work one-on-one with people, but the reality is that we can't always work one-on-one with people, and oftentimes the people who need it the most can't afford that. And so it's nice to be able to have those options as a teacher.
So one of the other classes that you're teaching is the anatomy of inversions, and I read in some of my research that inversions are something that you love. Is that true?
I do. I think somehow I've gotten kind of known for my inversions. What really intrigues me these days is really understanding how to do them in a way that is something that feeds you and helps you to grow, whether that's physically or anatomically or more spiritually and mentally. There's so much to inversions that really challenge us. Obviously, there's the physical challenge and the strength and the anatomy, but there's a lot of that mental capacity to be able to approach these really scary postures and look at, all of our limitations and our ability to believe in ourselves and our ability to face fear and our ability to kind of put all those mental stumbling blocks aside and look at something like inversions. I think asks us not only to look at those, but also to be present. And there's so much in that mentally, spiritually, that I think is interesting.
So will this be another workshop style class when you're looking at inversions?
Yeah, so another one. This one will be lecture, but it will be doing we'll be doing variations of them. So kind of leading up, so there's a nice step-by-step approach, so that someone who's newer has their variations they can work on. Someone who's more advanced has their variations they can work on, so that everyone gets to learn the anatomy and then put it into use. And for some, that'll be some poses versus other poses for other people.
Because that's what I was going to ask. Like, Wanderlust classes can be huge, right? And as a teacher, how do you manage all of those different students, most of whom you don't know, and all come in with completely different levels of understanding? How do you keep them all safe, especially when you're doing things like inversions? I think.
Yeah, and one of the big things is first I always start with the anatomy so that people can really understand it. I think understanding the poses helps you to dissipate some of the fear naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really, one of the things that's important, from a holistic healthcare perspective as well as yoga is getting people to take ownership of their bodies, their health, their responsibility to that. This is the niyamas and the yamas and, being present in that and getting them to break it down. So really giving them a really clear setup and asking them to go slow enough that they can decide when they need to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's always going to be one or two people who maybe, continue to go, but you kind of give them safe options so that, if they do, they have a safe option out of it as well. Which is trickier in inversions.
Yeah, I bet, because there's always that ego, right? And those people that kind of push through even when they know that they shouldn't do so. Yeah.
I think it's constantly just getting them to remember, what's important in the posture and taking it away from getting to the end point of the pose and more about the quality of kind of refining along the way. We start out with a lot of like the basic intro poses, which even for people who are more advanced, it's really nice to relearn those with really good alignment, because when you get into the more advanced postures, when you have that really integrated in the basics, then everything else gets easier. So it's, it's kind of tricky, but you kind of play with different ways to teach all the different levels and make it useful.
That's awesome. Okay, one final question, and I'm sort of asking everyone this. When you think of New Zealand, what's the first thing that comes to mind for you?
I think of mountains and grass and like everything beautiful outside you could imagine. I hear the landscape is very diverse, and all I hear about is how beautiful it is. So I hope I have enough time. I know I'll be there really quickly.
Yeah.
But I hope I have enough time to kind of at least look around and enjoy and appreciate the beauty a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Great Lake Taupo is it's beautiful, like it's stunning. So, and I'm sure I imagine you'll be driving down from Auckland, so even that drive is a really stunning drive. So, yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for your time today and sharing your expertise with us. And absolutely stoked that you're finally coming down to Wanderlust in New Zealand.
Yay, me too. I look forward to it. Thank you for having me.